salam, William.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you for joining me on this podcast. So I guess some people may be familiar with your face that are watching this because you produced a series of kind of mini documentaries for us around some random topics. I'm trying to think back to how it all came together. So I think you got in touch with us maybe a couple of years ago. And you had at the time, I think we had shared one of your videos, which was around, it was like this robot version of the Muslim influencer.
Oh yeah, that was yeah.
Well, okay, so for people that haven't seen that, because I think it's hard to actually dig up that video. I struggled to find it when I looked for it last. What was that?
So basically, it was an experiment in the sense that, if I can put things this way, as a sociologist, which is my job is to understand why do people do certain things. And it's basically like being a psychologist, but for crowds, for movements, for trends. But at the same time, when I started my studies, as a Muslim academic, there was something for me of a religious duty. Because, for example, if I talk about a topic, it's between 15,000 and 20,000 words, a chapter of my book or any article. But not everyone has the time to read this and necessarily understand all the jargon and stuff. So I consider, knowledge as an amana, that my knowledge is not halal, it's not valid until it's shared. And, so how my question for the start was, how do I make these topics, complex topics, accessible for most people? And then I got inspired by, these AG Plus videos. And I thought, let's try to do some videos in a similar way, a very short format with popular culture references and stuff. But also did some fictions. And the video you mentioned actually was one of these experiments where basically it's a dystopian fiction where I imagine what if all these influencers that we see on Instagram or YouTube, they were actually robots designed by Google, Facebook, for Muslims to abide by the government guidelines. Yeah. So that was and see how people would respond to such a narrative. So in this video, actually, I play a scientist, and and a friend of ours plays a robot. She actually stands still for 3 minutes, and we use Google, the voice from Google Translate for the speech and stuff.
It was. I feel like when that video came out, it definitely started a lot of conversations. I'm sure it ruffled a few feathers, but it also got people thinking and people talking, which I'm sure was your kind of aim behind that in some sense. And then you've also, and I'll probably try and put a link to all the different videos that we discussed in the description. But there was also a series that we did on the Muslim Vibe. And within that, we sat down and we kind of mapped out different conversation topics that we wanted to discuss. So things like politics, white privilege, AI was actually another one. And just looking at my notes here, masculinity, and what was that journey like? Because again, the kind of brief that I guess we gave to you was that we want to have pieces on this and we want conversations to be had around this, but we don't want it to be kind of light. We want to go in quite deep, and obviously with your kind of academic background as well, we want to really be able to get to the heart of these conversations. And I think we kind of did that. So I remember the white privilege episode. There was yourself and 2 or 3 other white Muslims that they interviewed that were all converts, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
And they were kind of unpacking and exploring and discussing their own relative privilege and whatever else. And it's interesting because there was varied feedback that we got. One person was asking, for example, why there was only white people on the documentary or on the mini documentary that we had produced. And I guess what was that whole journey like? What off the different mini documentaries that we did, there's one on marriage as well. What was your kind of favorite to record and research and film?
I think, all of these topics were very important for me because all of these topics, they were more or less part of my own journey. It's not only topics I research at university, but it's also topics that are impacting on my personal life, the life of my friends, and so on and so on. And, especially when it comes to things like Me Too movements or Black Lives Matter, the problem I felt was that lots of men and lots of white Muslims, when people express you have these global movements, so people feel attacked and they take it personally. And the thing is, as a man and as a white Muslim, I understand where it comes from. And my job is basically to tell people, because I have been within the community for a certain number of years, I've read, I listened to people, and I reflected also on myself, on my position and my role to play in this global context. So my duty is basically saying to people, look, it's not about you personally. If people, they started Me Too or Black Lives Matter, there are very specific reasons. My job is to explain from A to Z, why is it happening? And I think, lots of it comes from my own personal journey, because I didn't know anything about, for example, women's or Black people trauma and how colonialism, how patriarchy, and stuff have affected people through generations, through centuries. So I had to try to not only learn a theory is not enough. And I think, my own journey in that sense was really, an opener in the sense that even if I'm a white male Muslim, I had a hard time being Muslim in the sense that first, it was now 12 years ago, my family didn't accept my faith. Then later on, I got married. And during this marriage, where I was married to a wonderful person who was doing her 5 prayers, wearing the hijab, she was fasting on Mondays and Thursdays, doing tahajjud every single night. It was an abusive marriage. It was emotional, it was verbal, it was physical. So, how are you supposed, when you embraced Islam a few years ago, are you supposed to comprehend that someone who follows the faith that much can hurt you that much? Then, we moved to the UK. My wife left me. I was already experiencing severe depression and suicidal thoughts. But then what happened in Britain is I got rejected from the wider Muslim community for marriage and for jobs. And I got rejected for reasons I still I cannot comprehend. I got rejected because I was told I have the wrong parents. My parents are Polish. I was rejected because I was told I have the wrong passport because I'm a French citizen. I was told that I'm not rich. I was told that I'm the wrong kind of doctor because apparently it's GP or nothing. Even a PhD in physics from Cambridge, Oxford, no, it doesn't count. I got rejected because people thought me doing my 5 prayers and having a beard was too much. Even if I don't have the Sunnah standard, even that was too much for people. And we know, as I said, people who embrace Islam, that our faith shouldn't be contingent on people, but just figure out the contrast. We are sold this idea that the Ummah is this kind of magical thing where everyone supports each other. And year after year, I had to experience all this abuse, all this rejection. So how are you supposed to understand what's happening? And it's been hard. So even if now I'm married and I have a job, alhamdulillah, I still haven't fully recovered, and I'm not even sure that one day I'll be able to fully recover. But one thing is that it would have been very easy for me to end up really bitter and resentful, towards women, towards the wider Muslim community. But I think reflecting on my journey, 2 things really saved me. The first thing is, of course, Islam, because I embrace Islam not because of people, but because of signs on which I cannot turn my back on. And also because we have this framework, this philosophy that tells us that the purpose, the hardships, they serve a purpose in life. But I think what really saved me was to understand how did that happen. And I think, when you experience trauma, when you experience injustice, the greatest thing that someone can make you understand that it's not your fault. And I think sociology helped me to understand that, no, if I had these experiences, it was not my fault. It's because people, they have their own issues, they have their own unresolved trauma from childhood or else their own bad experiences. And also, and I think this has become like not my war, my jihad, but like my focus, that all of us, have embraced, even unknowingly, parts of this dominant society that tells us to oppress others. Like all of us, we have embraced parts of racism, we have absorbed parts of this abusive masculinity, we have absorbed parts of capitalism and neoliberalism, parts of this culture that tells us that as Muslims, if you want to be happy, if you want to be free from racism and Islamophobia, then forgo your religion. Consider Islam as a fashion statement. Don't be too religious, don't be too political, don't make waves, make money your god, make whiteness your god, and everything's gonna be fine. But it's an illusion.
Can I, firstly, I actually had no clue about the context and the background, your personal background that you mentioned. I'm genuinely very shocked and sorry to hear that you had to go through all of that.
That's fine.
But it's I've lost my train of thought for a second. Hold on. I think with regards to everything you're discussing, coming to the faith and being rejected on, as you say, multiple levels, and having the issues that you also faced as well. What are your thoughts on the notion of whiteness? Because we obviously started this by talking about white privilege and the documentary we did there, and you spoke about Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, which are arguably neither of them is your fight, so to speak, as a white man and also as a man in the Me Too movement. It's technically not kind of yours, but I've often heard people talking about the fact that they feel that when they become Muslim, they lose their white privilege or they lose their whiteness. And similar to kind of what you're describing, right? There are levels to this, right? And we can't, and I've got I've started to co-host the I'm Not Your Bilal podcast with Nabil Abdul Rashid, and on there we talk extensively about the experience of Black Muslims and the struggle that exists in our community and the oppression that the Black community face. But you've kind of painted for me a very different picture to how I perceive often the white revert experience, because amongst reverts, white reverts are commonly seen as the most respected and revered. I mean, you're a handsome, blue-eyed man, blue-ish, right?
I think so.
Looks it. But like the perception would be that like, okay, this guy is he's the model revert, but the reality is that you've obviously faced levels of rejection from the community, from externally and everywhere else. What's your perception on, I guess, your own whiteness?
So, I think the challenge for like white Muslims and like even like myself, what I went through is to understand that when people speak about whiteness, it's about a system. It's not about white people. It's very important to differentiate these kind of things. Whiteness is what has fueled colonialism. It is basically, in my research, I call the white civilizational project, in the sense that every things that we have around us, whether it is in culture, in politics, education, it serves this purpose for like advancing the white civilizational project, which basically says very simply that if you're not white, you're not human, you're nobody. That's like putting it very, very simply. And as white people, of course, when you embrace Islam, you are not equal to, let's say, a white English middle-class man who has grown up in the south of England, of course. You have like lots of working class white people who embrace Islam who really struggle a lot. And if you look at those who are put in positions of power, it's always those who are the most privileged, who either have like famous relatives, who have a decent amount of network among influential people and these kind of things, they're basically, just after the Shahada, they're like given this title ambassador of Islam.
Yeah.
That's a problem. But for me, it was understanding that the era we live in, of course, the colonization of land has ended some time ago, but what has remained is the colonization of minds. There is this researcher, Hussein Bulhan, a psychologist in Somaliland. He has coined this concept called meta-colonialism, in the sense that what I just said, we have absorbed parts of this dominant culture, and we end up oppressing our brothers and sisters. We have been colonized even without knowing it. And I'll give you an example of how it happened to me. When I was seeing all the men, like the women I wanted to marry, they would go for, or all the men who had hired instead of me for all these charities, I looked at them, and deeply, I had this narrative that I'm a bad Muslim because of who I am, and I need to look like them, to behave like them. I need to shave my beard. I need to stop praying my prayers. I need to get a white BMW on PCP, even if I hate BMWs because they're so unreliable, but I'm taking a tangent. I had to basically...
I know you love your cars.
I needed to forgo my religion, change my appearance. Even I was, thinking, should I start again from scratch my studies and become a banker?
Yeah.
And basically, this is meta-colonialism. I wanted to sacrifice my ethics, my values, my identity, my faith, just to fit in.
So coming back to what you said a little while ago, you said that sociology helped you to kind of survive almost, right? By that, do you mean the fact that understanding and seeing societal trends, and the fact that I think for most people, in fact, right, you know statistics, herd mentality, the basics, right? But I think a lot of the times in my own life that actually I feel like I'm an exception. But actually you end up realizing you're not an exception. We have that mentality. So even when you talk about, colonized minds, for example, as much as on a rational, intellectual level, we might appreciate that notion, internally, we still may have that internalized. And that's the thing, I think even with the conversations that are happening now in communities, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think now a lot of people are having these conversations. The difficulty is not in saying I'm not racist, but it's in feeling how you feel. So for example, when you see a black man walking down the street, do you feel threatened? Do you feel more like uneasy because he's a black man? All that kind of stuff. And so what was it for you, I guess, that that sociology did in allowing you to not, I guess, fall into that trap of despair? Because it's a very interesting to say that science liberated you. So yeah, do you mind expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think sociology by itself was the only reason. It's just like someone who helps you to understand like what's going on behind the scenes. Why do people do that in a certain sense? I'm really tempted of doing this very easy analogy of the red pill, which has been so much misappropriated through time. But
you put it in a few of your videos as well, haven't you?
I'm
sure you have.
Yeah, that's a cheeky move, of course.
Everyone gets it, basically.
Yeah, everyone gets it. That's the main thing. So yeah, but I was just saying, theory is one thing, but even, I know people, even like academics who are like 20 years older than me, they have studied all the stuff about race, gender, and stuff, and they still don't get it. And I don't know. It's not like a solution for everything, but it depends. I think how do you approach sociology? Maybe also knowing like where all these concepts they come from, because of course, like you cannot absorb everything, in the sense that not everything that is produced by sociology is necessarily in line with like Islamic ethics or values or frameworks, or just like, you know, analyzed, because lots have been analyzed and conceptualized through white men specifically. So what about, for example, adapting this concept for like non-white people or women? I mean, it has its own challenges. But I think, you know, it's when we talk about Me Too and Black Lives Matter, why do these topics unfortunately can like spark like hostile reactions? I think it has to do with emotional intelligence. I don't know if should I expand on this topic?
If you think there's merit in it, then the stage is yours.
So, you know, the thing is, when I started my research and my study, so as I said, I cannot like just hold the knowledge for myself, because ultimately, you know, as a Muslim, I want to see a community we can be proud of. And a community we can be proud of is a community which is strong at supporting the most vulnerable of its members. This is in my opinion. But the problem is our society doesn't educate us. Our parents do not train us to cultivate emotional intelligence, which means that when people express pain, because, you know, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, it's people expressing their pain, their trauma. But, you know, when you don't know how to, and sometimes, you know, it's just like in marriage. When your spouse has a bad day and is in pain, you cannot expect your spouse to be like gentle and polite and like word things like, oh, you know, I had such a bad day, I feel so much anger inside of me. That's completely utopist. But what your spouse expects, I mean, this is my experience, you know, you just need someone to be there, to sit with you and to tell you that, look, I hear you, I believe you, and I'm here for you. And this is basically, as a community, when people heard this is what they expect. But because, you know, we haven't been trained to hold this space for people's pain, where just people take it personally, and they end up like hating on women, hating on black people. I mean, the stuff like I see online for my research, it's just like absurd, in the sense, you know, people saying that, yeah, or like our black brothers and sisters are basically, they are performing, they are seeking attention. But I mean, I just want to say to people, please read. We have like so much literature and evidence about like what has been happening for centuries, and still we have people saying that these guys are just performing.
What's really interesting is that there's this weird fascination, I feel, with invalidating people's lived experiences. And there was one thing that, like, I remember I was having a conversation. So I'm involved with my kind of local mosque and madrasa from like an organizational perspective. And I had a friend of mine who was basically from the Somali community, and I come from like a predominantly East African, Asian background, a bunch of brown people basically. And I had him. We had a three-way call, and I was talking with someone else from the leadership team, and I asked my friend to just recount his experience of going to the madrasa as a kid. And he said something that, from that call, it was that we spoke for about an hour, but this one like particular thing that he said really stuck with me. He goes, look, I can't, because the guy was like asking him, okay, so what happened to you at the madrasa? Like, what did people say? What were the teachers? What was it? He goes, look, I can't tell you what happened, but he goes, I can tell you the feeling. The feeling has remained. And that for me was so striking that, you know, all these years later, and you know how it is, like when you think of a good or a bad time or memory or whatever it is, like you remember where you were, you remember, you know, what was going on. Like I think back, I know it's very trivial, but I'm a Liverpool fan. When Liverpool won the Champions League in 2005, I remember what I ate at half time. I remember who was in the room. Like I can see that because it was such a vivid memory and such a positive emotion for me, and same with negative emotions, right? I remember the you know, the most traumatic, I say, experience in my life you can remember from start to finish, and I find it unbelievable that people are willing to just brush aside other people's things, and as you say, brush it off as performative. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but that just kind of came to my mind
Yeah, no.
because I think yes, it's really crazy the way that society is going. But anyway, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, so just I was talking in a relationship in a married couple, and I think if we say that we are all brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
like we need to actually be faithful to what does it mean. Like we don't need to be being against, but the problem is now in our society we just have forgotten. I think that as human beings, not even as Muslims, we are supposed to be caliphs. Like we're literally given all the people, all the things around us for us to take care of them, because like everyone comes from God. And in the same way, what I find really sad is that not only like people are just are ready to antagonize, but it's like, the biggest strength of the Prophet ﷺ was his ability to turn his greatest enemies into the greatest supporters of Islam, just like Abu Sufyan and some others. But it's like our society has completely forgotten the concept of Abu Sufyan. You are either with us or against us. And we have to be very honest. So this kind of mentality is very toxic. It's either you can find it in some activist spaces, like all of these people, what we call social justice warriors, but at the same time in very conservative spaces like the alt bros. Like people are falling into their own traps, and we end up in this paradoxical situation where by denying women's a voice, we end up burying the very daughters that Islam came to save from an early grave. By denying a hearing to our black brothers and sisters, we are putting back on them the chains of Jahiliyyah. It's just like, if I can do a Star Wars reference, Obi-Wan Kenobi saying to Anakin Skywalker, you have become the very thing you swore to destroy. And actually, talking about fiction, I think there is a really powerful parallel you can make between Star Wars and the Ummah nowadays, in the sense that if you remember the story of Anakin Skywalker, there is a very solid fan theory online which says that Anakin Skywalker could have been prevented from being Darth Vader if and only if the Jedi Ummah was there to support him. Because look, the poor guy, he was grieving the loss of his mom. He was fearing the death of his wife. But nobody was here to listen to him and support him. So what happened? Who offered him a deal? Dark side of the Force. Prevent in a way, if we can make a parallel. But yeah, it's just, I believe, all these people who become very antagonistic, I want to believe, as brothers and sisters, we just as a community, we need a stronger brotherhood and sisterhood. We need mentoring. Spaces where we are able to meet people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, but also younger people and elder people. And this is something because again, individualization of society, this is something which is lacking.
So I have to say at this point, William, I like and respect you, which is why I allowed the Star Wars reference to go on that long. But I, number one, know nothing about Star Wars. And I don't appreciate starting. I'm joking. It's fine, but completely over my head. I'm sure someone out there listened to that and knew what the hell you were saying. You mentioned prevent there, and I think the reason that we wanted to have this conversation today was actually to do with your research project that you're working on right now. It's basically. The way that you put it to me before we started recording was that you're looking at reverse engineering what the British establishment has done to the Muslim community. That in itself, I think a lot of people will ask the first question is, what have they done? But then also, I wanted to be able to kind of split the time between talking about that and the more positive and the initiatives, as you put it, that have hacked the system. In various different areas. So you talked about the arts, mental health, history and heritage, environment, and community organizing. I don't know if we'll be able to go into that much depth into everything, and I appreciate that this is a 3-year project that has taken your life, and we're trying to discuss it on the remaining half an hour of this podcast. But maybe we can come back and do this again. But I think just initially, what are your... I mean, what have you found?
So
Actually, sorry,
yeah,
sorry. I'm going to change the question there slightly.
yeah.
So, when you talk about reverse engineering, what the British establishment has done to the Muslim community, what do you perceive that the establishment has done, and what impact has it had on the community? And also, if you have any thoughts on, I would potentially put them as like house Muslims, to borrow a term from the African American struggle. But yeah, those three for now, and then I'll probably interrupt you at some point.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the basic thing that if we observe what's happening around us in terms of what the British establishment has done to us, but not only, it happens in the US, it happens in France, in the rest of Europe. Basically, people have brought the communities, if we can talk of the Muslim community as a whole, to a state of deprivation. In the sense that we are now, we collectively are craving for financial stability, for representation in media and politics, for visibility. And because we are so desperate, we are willing to accept any deal that is offered to us. And it's just, I was following, for example, the conversation between Saima Aslam from the Bradford Literary Festival and Suhaima Mazun Khan on The Guardian. And Saima Aslam said something very powerful. She said, having principles is not something everyone can afford. So it tells you the level of resignation some people have come to.
Wow.
And I understand, because I have friends, for example, their only source of income is, for example, Instagram. And if they are single parents, and you have Nike offering you £3,000 a month for becoming an ambassador, how can you say no to that, even knowing the fact that they have really unfair work practices? If you have a small Muslim school and the council offers you £50,000 to collaborate with the prevent officer, how can you say no to that? So these are the dilemmas we are actually facing the community, because if you look at the same time, who can offer us funding if we want to do something around arts, spirituality, or a social thing, apart from prevent? Initiatives are very small. You only have maybe one or two, for example, resourcing racial justice, which is a grassroots initiative.
Yeah.
But apart from this, no. And at the same time, we have people in the community who give £10,000 of zakat. We have people in the community who have bought a Rolls Royce, £100,000 cash. And I mean, fair enough, people give to charity, to orphans abroad. But why is there no will to reinvest this money in the community? Do you know how many PhDs we can fund with £100,000? We can fund 5 PhD students with that. And this is the level we have arrived at. And the problem is, because the community is so divided, so you have people who have obviously tried to mingle and try to take advantage of our state of divisions and our inequalities. And this is where the prevent strategy comes into play. Because the thing is also, they have the prevent strategy has much more evolved since 9/11 and 7/7, in the sense that back in the old days, it was very antagonistic. It was old players Henry Jackson Society, Native Informants, the Quilliam Foundation, and they would just label people. Extremists, terrorists, extremists, don't do business with them, they're terrorists, and so on and so on. But they have realized year after year that, it's not really working. We need to find something else. And now in the era of social media, what was very, very interesting is that counter-extremism think tanks have started collaborating with the tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter. You even have a counter-extremism think tank. They gained access to Facebook Messenger to prevent extremism, meaning that they could not only intercept our conversations, but they could intervene in real time if they thought there was a threat. So it raises lots of questions about surveillance, data collection, data privacy.
Okay, so I feel like to offer a bit of a counterbalance or a counter narrative, often the thing that is said is that, okay, look, whilst the majority of the Muslim community are not a threat, there are individuals in the Muslim community that are vulnerable to being tapped up by ISIS. Shamima Begum is currently quite a big news story, for example. Great example of someone who's been groomed and taken over there. So what's wrong if me and you are chatting on Facebook Messenger? I'm just catching up with you. We're chatting about whatever. So what if someone's reading that? Like, so what if our privacy is being invaded? Like, there is a potential threat because I might, for example, the TMV might be a front for God knows what, and you might be well, you are a revert who is potentially vulnerable because blah blah blah. So like, they have to protect us. No.
Yeah, this is their narrative. But the problem it poses is when you ask the question, where is the red line? From when are you considered like a good Muslim and when you start becoming a bad Muslim in the eyes of counter-extremism strategies? And if you look at the literature, so there is like documents which have been like written by the US government back in the days, you know, like in the early 2000s, about like very precisely and openly saying like who is a good Muslim, who is a bad Muslim, with whom the government should deal with and whom they should avoid.
Where did you say this was from? In the UK or US?
The US.
The US.
It was engineered by the US, but like now, even like in mainland Europe, like people have adopted the same guidelines because, you know, like all the research comes from the same places. And in these documents, it was clearly said that a good Muslim were those who were like not too political, not too religious, who were like invested in business, who had positions of influence, and yeah, just, you know, the classic narrative: don't make waves, make money. That basically, that's like in a nutshell, like what a good Muslim is according to these documents.
So I think it begs the question then around, because I think social media for me is the place that people are going to be inspired, to look at their role models and follow people and whatever else. The kinds of individuals who are potentially pacifying Muslims from within the community, serving as materialistic role models, business entrepreneurs, but lack the moral, ethical stuff. What do you make of them? Like, do you think that these individuals have been duped by the system, or that they are somehow a part of like a wider network of let's pacify Muslims?
You know, when it comes to individuals, it's very hard because the system has become so pervasive and subtle. It's very, very hard even to detect when, like, I'm getting in a government trap. For example, you know, you heard of scandals of, for example, Umasonic. So this is a case of what is called astroturfing. So when the government engineers like initiatives that pretend to be from the community, but are in fact like controlled by the government to serve a specific narrative, in that case a counter-extremism narrative. And now you have programs, for example, projects like, you know, YouTube Creators for Change.
Yeah.
So this is counter-extremism funded. There's a think tank pouring money into it, and basically, yeah, as you said, the idea is to let's like handpick very and carefully select who we want to be a Muslim role model, to show other Muslims, this is how you should speak, this is how you should behave, this is how you should look. But I'm not even sure, you know, people who get involved in these schemes, they are aware, because we are in an era where we don't have time. We don't even have time to just sit and reflect, like and like weigh the consequences of what am I doing and do the proper research, because like things are becoming less and less transparent, unfortunately. So yeah, this is it's just like very, very hard, because at the same time, you know, they know they're preying on a community which is vulnerable. So when you see like they like in some, for example, Muslim elitist organizations, they promise you like jobs, they promise you visibility, they promise you to mingle with people in the government, with like wealthy businessmen and stuff. Yeah, you might think, yeah, it comes from a good intention and it might be innocent, but you don't know like the partnerships they have with these counter-extremism like funds and where it can lead. So it's just like, it's very, very hard to decipher.
What do you think is the root of why we fall for this? And what I mean by that is I've spoken to someone, for example, who's involved with an organization that takes government funding for projects and whatever else. And we were having a similar kind of conversation. He was obviously saying, oh, you know, his argument came down to similar to what the Bradford Literary Festival response was. he was like saying to me that, oh, you know, when you have staff to pay and you have overheads sometimes, and you want to keep the lights on, sometimes you have to take jobs, or you have to do things that you don't necessarily want to or don't feel comfortable with. And I'm just thinking, well, then don't hire so many people. You know what I mean? Don't have such a big office, or whatever it might be, metaphorically speaking. And for me, like, I feel like there's that side of things where people are willfully, in my opinion, turning a blind eye to the moral issues with what they're doing. But then you also have people who are like the Bradford Literary Festival is a great example, where people signed up to it not knowing and not appreciating the background and whatever they saw as being problematic. Suhaima is an example of someone that when she did see it, she spoke up and she withdrew her support and withdrew her attendance. And I think many other people did off the back of that as well. But that created like this whole kind of thing. But then you still had influential Muslims turning up to the event and showing their support and being a part of it. And it becomes very difficult because there's also like talk of virtue signaling and everything else. And I think, yeah, you know, for the majority of Muslims, we just want to like walk around and not have to like character reference and check every single person, every organization. You just want to assume the best, right? But I personally feel that a lot of people, and I know people, I've met a guy who in fact even works with Prevent. And this is, so I'm personally very anti the Prevent agenda in all shapes and sizes and forms of it and whatever else. But I remember meeting this guy and like having a conversation with him. And I asked him, I'm like, listen, do you like hand on heart 100% believe that what you're doing is right for the Muslim community and that you're helping the Muslim community? And in fact, at the same weekend, I met somebody who in America was also working, I can't remember, it was Homeland Security or whatever it was. And he was basically telling me that like, for him, the guy in America, he was saying that he was able to essentially do damage limitation. So if it was just a bunch of non-Muslims in the room trying to enforce this, then it's going to be chaos and they will clamp down on us like we've never seen before. And I mean, look at places like France as an example with the burqa and everything else. And, you know, the general anti-Muslim sentiment that's pervasive throughout Europe pretty much, right? I think we have it bad here, but it's a lot worse in other parts of the world, I believe anyway. But what he was, what they were both saying essentially is that, you know, we feel that without our presence, without our involvement, this would be 10 times worse. Do you think that's a justified stance?
No, because we have historical examples that unfortunately this like damage limiting stance doesn't work. Like,
So what does work? What's the response?
So according to what I've seen, because I followed people who like have decided to stand like their own ground and their own values. And the thing is, like, it's very difficult, but we need to have build back the confidence. It's because like our self-esteem is so low that we are ready to accept these deals, and like a lot of it comes from our need for validation. But when you seek validation, as like I spoke in the like our videos, you basically give power to someone else. And people have tried, you know, like just for example, academics like Sadek Hamid and Tahir Abbas to contribute to like government review of Prevent. It doesn't work because unless you have the same narrative than them, you won't be accepted. But what I mean by like confidence is, you know, it's something rooted in our spirituality in the sense of the notion of tawakkul. Trusting Allah that it's going to be okay if you stand your ground. And I have one of my favorite examples is a friend of mine. So her name is Farah Azam. She's like an entrepreneur and she does like henna designs. And she's a single mother. She once was offered a commission by a very famous alcohol brand to do designs on alcohol bottles for like several thousands of pounds. So again, like, how can you say no to that? And she could have said, yeah, you know, I'm not like selling it. I'm just doing the design on the bottle. It could have been fine. It's fine for some people. But she standed firm. She said, no, I'm not gonna even contribute to this. And a few days later, subhanAllah, she was offered even a better deal from a more famous company in a completely halal way. So you have these kind of stories, and like even if we look back to history, it always pays to stand your ground. But the problem is we have not been raised with the confidence of like saying, yeah, like we don't have the consciousness of we have a power in saying no. Like, and it is maybe at the moment, maybe our greatest force. And in my work, I look at organizations and initiatives which are not necessarily popular. You may never hear of them in the media, but they still do their work because they believe it's important.
Can I just, before we, because I do want to talk about the organizations and come to that, but the example of Farah that you mentioned, that's like, it's really good to hear that she basically did that and whatever else. But I think from my own experience, is that you don't always get that magic phone call 2 days later. But there's a certain power in respecting yourself and your own principles and morals and saying no. That in itself is the reward. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I fear that someone's going to hear this and be like, okay, I'm going to turn down this gig. And then they'll be like sitting by their phone waiting 2 weeks for like this magic phone call that might not come. But I think in itself, just having principles and being able to stand by them, it's interesting. Like, again, comes back to what was said earlier about, like, principles are not something that everyone can afford. And there's this notion, and it's, when we talk about tawakkul, I don't think tawakkul is necessarily like God's gonna fix everything. It's just that for me, it's the fact that God is there, God is watching, God is listening, God is observing, God knows what's happening, and obviously has his kind of invisible hand guiding whatever's happening in your life. And like, I've found that, even difficult experiences that we all face, they form a part of you, right? And they're so instrumental sometimes in like what happens, what you become in the future, that you think it's difficult at the time, but like 10 years, 20 years down the line, you might be like, thank God that happened. Because actually I learned so much. And also, again, if you don't have that awakening at one point, I think tawakkul for me is knowing that had X, Y, Z not happened, who knows what God was protecting you and saving you from, right? But that's the kind of tawakkul. But anyways, you were talking about, and I think it's probably a good time to move on to the initiatives that are hacking the system. So obviously I was kind of throwing a few counter responses to you, which are entirely not my own. Just to be clear, I'm on side with pretty much a lot of what you've said. But who and what and how can we then, I guess, fight against the system? Because I think there's this, as you say, there's this need and desire for approval that we have. And I've seen like people working within the media sphere as well, for example, that it's like working at a reputable and a large media house, organization, whatever, being a token Muslim or a token ethnic person, but feeling validated because, like, they were asked their opinion on a video that was going to feature the other, whatever it might be. But how can we be resilient? Like, how, and what are the examples that you have of people, individuals, organizations that have maintained resilience and essentially not given in? Because you mentioned like the YouTube change makers for change. I can't remember what they're called. Huh? The YouTube
creators for change.
Creators for change. That's it. And like, what frustrates me often is that many of the role models that we have in the Muslim community that are either artificially created or have risen to prominence or fame one way or another, a lot of them, unfortunately, are for very superficial things. So, we have, and like we just did a podcast a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about influencers. And I think like, gaining influence by taking a bunch of selfies and looking really attractive, whether you're a man or a woman, and growing a following that way, especially if it lacks substance and depth, it's frustrating because I feel like that's taking up potential elsewhere, right? But the role models or the prominent individuals that we have, you would struggle to name many that are politically on point and are really able to deliver a message and to influence an audience. And I look at someone like Suhaima. Suhaima is a fantastically talented poet. She's very much involved in various different activist fields and organizing different activities and whatever else. But I feel like while she has an audience, it's still not the size of audience that her message deserves. And maybe because it's not attractive to a kind of passive Muslim, maybe that's why. That like a lot of people just want to live life, be culturally Muslim, not really enjoy I say enjoy, but not really endure the social justice element. I think that comes and is a big part of our faith. But yeah, so tell me more about specifically, I think in the kind of arts, mental health, history and heritage, environment and community organizing.
Can I just bounce quickly on what you just said?
Please
before? Because, also the thing is not only always to fit in, it's also just to stop the pain. Because for me, for example, it would be so easier, instead of having to do freelance on the side, to just accept like a job for a counter-extremism think tank, 60K a year, 30 plus days of annual leave, sorted. I would be so happy. It would have been so easy for me.
I'd be so happy for you.
But the thing is, also if you happen to be in positions of power, how can you be political? We have seen lots of examples, influencers, celebrities, when they start talking about issues. For example, we have the school case study, Amina Khan, L'Oreal, Palestine, or even Mesut Özil, when he spoke about the Uyghurs. They got backlash. So how can you even be, it's like discipline and punish, literally. And at the same time, they know that our fear is their power. Because they know that, if we make waves, we are so in a precarious situation that we cannot afford to do this.
But how? So I think Ozil was a great example. How can we thrive and survive? And as you say, for some people, it's just about turning off the pain, right? There are arguably other Muslim footballers out there who might be passionate about Palestine or the Uyghurs or whatever, but fear speaking out because they might lose their endorsements and their platform and whatever, and arguably what they've worked their whole career to build, to provide for their families and leave a legacy behind. How can we have essentially we can't succeed in this life materially? I don't mean in a financial sense, but we can't succeed in our field if we are true to ourselves.
It's very difficult, but it's possible. I can name you some names people who actually are in positions of power and I think I really respect.
Please do.
For example, Asim Qureshi in Cage, Zara Sultana, or Shazad Yunus from Mozmatch. They were approached by one very famous elitist organization, Muslim organization funded by counter-extremism. They said no. And they know that saying no to them is closing so many doors. But they said no. And I respect them so much for this. This is, what Suhaima, she said in one of her posts. We need to get out of this scarcity mindset. And she means that, we all of us, to some extent, we hold even a little bit of power. But the greatest, power corrupts. And the way it corrupts is by making us believe that we don't have any. This is why we're seeking more. More numbers, more money, more power, more visibility. But, even in a position like myself, for example, I just need to think. The little I have of, let's say, financial stability or platform, this is what I did in my videos, how can I just pass the mic? If I have a platform, who are the experts I want to hear talking about these things? People like Fawzia Ahmed, Said Mustafa, Ali Juman Amun, and so who have not only the theoretical experience, but the community experience. And this is just so important. If you have even a little bit of privilege, a little bit of wealth of knowledge, share it. It's just like the zakat. We have an amana. It has to benefit every one of us, even if it's very, very small. And so back to the organizations that I really, really appreciate and which are the focus of my work. It's people for example, if we think of Heritage, Abdul Malik Taylor. For 10 years, he's been guiding people around London, showing traces of Muslim heritage. Sadia Ahmed from Everyday Muslim Project. Again, for more than 10 years, she has been building the first and only Muslim archive about what all the elder generations they did and how they built this country, literally. It's like, and no university is going to fund this. There are people like, for example, if we talk about arts, Hassan Vavda, he organized the very first Eid celebration at Tate Britain, or Abbas Zahedi, the first Juma prayer in Tate Modern, like disrupting these institutional art spaces. Is like no one wants to like talk about this because it's just like not popular. Or like people, if we talk about environment or healing, Rabia Mali, Pearls of Islam and the Herbal Blessing Clinic, or their new initiative, the Black Muslim Women Healing Collective. These are very small, very informal initiatives. But it's all about like, spirituality, environment and stuff, but it's just not trendy. Because people, again, scarcity mindset, we think of the short term. We don't think of the long term. We want like instant result and don't think that like our growth, our healing, our resilience is going to take literally years to build. And this is, but these are people, even if they don't have much funding, much visibility, they still keep on doing their work, no matter what people think. And
I've always found there's like a really fascinating resilience. Is it Abdul Malik?
Abdul Malik Taylor.
Malik Taylor. I randomly bumped into him. I didn't know him. We had exchanged emails like years before this, but a few years back I was in Chicken Cottage in Holborn. If anyone from Chicken Cottage in Holborn is listening, we appreciate free chicken wings. Both myself and William are fully down for business anytime. So I was sat there, and if anyone's been to the Chicken Cottage in Holborn, it's like there aren't individual tables. It's like rows of tables, and you're sat next to random people. And I don't know how, like, I was sat opposite him. I was on my way back from work, and I was tired and whatever.
Was he wearing his hat?
Or
not?
I can't remember, to be
the
honest.
red one then.
I can't remember, but like we got talking, and I told him, I'm involved with a project called the Muslim Vibe, and he's like, I run this thing, and then we realized that actually we had exchanged emails like well before that about God knows what. But ever since then, like I always see him at random events and random places, and like I don't know why we never have ice cream vans in our area, but they decided to come out today. It's a hot day today, to be fair, but so there's a certain resilience amongst a few people that I've seen in the community that you'll see every now and again at events, and you'll see their names mentioned online. So like Asim Qureshi is a great example. We had Asim on the podcast a while ago, and till this day, there are a few podcast episodes that I get constant, I get recurring messages about from random people, like in my own network. 6 months will pass between, and then all of a sudden someone will message me like, I just listened to this podcast, it was amazing. Asim's one is an example of that, because he approached activism from a perspective of God centricity almost, which is something very novel and different for a lot of people. And like his book, have you read his book, A Virtue of Disobedience?
Yeah.
So in that book, I was quite surprised almost to see that he was so able and willing to approach social justice and activism from a religious lens and perspective, quoting the Quran, talking about examples of the prophets, because there's forever been, I think, a disconnect in a lot of people's eyes with regards to activism and mosque. And he talks about it in the book as well, right? And for people that are listening to this, I definitely encourage, number one, reading the book, but also, if you want a taste, listen to the podcast that I did. I have to shout it out. Obviously, it's my podcast. But the podcast that I did with Asim was actually a really fascinating and amazing conversation. I loved it. Was amazing because when you read the book, you feel like you're talking to him. And then when you're talking to him about the book, it's like The Matrix. It's crazy. Inception, Matrix, I don't know, one of them. But there's an interesting aura, and I feel like that there is a growing movement of people that are willing and able to kind of not comply. But then it for me, like when you said just now that it's going to take time, like our healing and our the process is going to take years, and I think, and I forget this sometimes because I want everything to be fixed now. I'm a utopian kind of guy. But then I realized that actually it's going to be a long journey. And like even with the Muslim vibe, I see it as providing a space, but we're only at the beginning. Like I can only imagine what platforms like this are going to be like in 20 years time. I think there's going to be a lot more sophistication and a lot more buy-in from the community. You mentioned earlier about the fact that people are not willing, there are people who have extensive car libraries pretty much, not just one Rolls Royce, but often several. But when it comes to reinvesting into projects, and like I think the risk test is another example. I don't know if you've spoken to them and looked into them, but we had Shaf on the podcast a while back from the risk test, and even a project like that shook up, I think, a lot in the industry, and they're now involved with various kind of, I think that, I don't know if they're on a BAFTA committee. There was something that they recently got involved with, but just like for me, the underlying sentiment is resilience, but we lack. What do you think we lack? Why are we not resilient?
There's two things. Yeah, there's resilience, the ability of putting things in perspective, and when you fall, then you stand up. But there's also, the matter of like concern. Who are we concerned about? And, understandably, because we are like under the fire from so many sides, like not only outside of the community, but inside the community, I think I understand why people, they're after their own gain. But if you look at all these like small initiatives that I mentioned, these guys who keep doing the same thing and the same thing, even if it's not successful, even there's like almost no one coming, they still do it because it all started by a concern about those immediately around them. What can they do with the little they can do for those, something they really like, they feel concerned about, and for the people who are in their immediate proximity. And like it's often, like when you think of your own children, of like your friends, like it comes from there. And again, focusing on this, like you cannot, it's like a fuel you can never extinguish. When you have like the reason why you're doing this is in front of your eyes every single day, it's very, very different. And I guess this is like a lot of why like the motivation comes from. And also like, it's like people who are very spiritual, and also I think it helps. I wanted to mention something like, you mentioned resilience. I mentioned this. I wanted to say something. I have a blank, and
you warned me that this was going to happen, and it did. I can ramble for like 3 minutes. While you try and figure out
short term and long. Yes,
okay,
yes, I found. Talking about spirituality, I often like also find hope in how Islam started in the Hijaz. It started very small. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he started with the poor, people who were enslaved. And the message didn't even go public for 3 years after the first revelation of the cave episode. And, it took at least a decade for Muslims to be to be in a position of, like, they have built enough momentum, they could actually negotiate with the Quraysh and return to Makkah. So, things start small. There's this, I think there's a French person, I don't remember the name because I don't remember the names of French people, but he said, big revolutions start often in small rooms. And I think this is the philosophy. Even we can, draw analogies with investing. Now this era is literally this, I can make you rich in 5 easy steps mentality. But if you look, people who actually invest and become rich by investing, it's not overnight. It's going to take maybe 10, maybe 20 more years before they're in a position where they can generate, invest and have a side income just because of the investment. It's the same thing. And this is the trap we're falling in. But it's hard. We have to recognize that it's hard. When you struggle for money, when you struggle, of course, you absolutely want a quick fix. You have in psychology, it's called like a tunnel effect. That you have such a big mental overload because of your struggles that you cannot think on the long term. It's again, like, you know, it's important to understand, like, why are we trapped, and like there's like mechanism explaining all of that. And the key is, first of all, be able to name all these things, all these obstacles, all these challenges, because we cannot defeat what we cannot name.
Don't know. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's really, I like that. That's really interesting. I think reflecting on my own experience with this stuff, I feel like it's very difficult, and maybe I probably haven't fully done the exercise of like identifying all of the different obstacles that we face, if we can call them obstacles. And I guess, yeah, only once you've done that can you begin to tackle one by one. And I look at that not even from like a societal, but even like if we talk about God and getting closer to God, we have to do like a full body service. I know you like your cars, so I can try and talk about MOTs and stuff. I don't know, but you know, we need to assess ourselves from top to bottom, and like almost identify what the problem checklist is, and then we can start to work on them one by one, right? Whereas if we just try and say, all right, I want to get here, but actually the vehicle, which is yourself, is not fine-tuned. Is that a car analogy?
Whatever.
Yeah, okay. It's not polished enough to get you there. We're gonna struggle, right? So you know, I think that's really interesting. Look, I'm conscious of time. We've just gone over the kind of hour mark. I'm sure there's more we can discuss, and I think we should probably sit down for a part 2 once you've finished writing.
When the book will be out.
Maybe. When the book's out, and I know that you're also going to be doing more stuff and writing articles that are going to be targeted towards lay people like myself, and maybe we can pick up some of the conversations that come out from that, because I think this stuff is really important for me, especially. I feel like there are certain portions of the Muslim community that either through ignorance, negligence, deciding to turn a blind eye, or just being so caught up in everything else, don't necessarily look at and see the wider implications of what's happening and what the prevent agenda is doing, for example, and what Muslim individuals who willingly engage with the establishment, what that kind of leads to, and I guess the state of things for Muslims. And even I don't fully know the extent of it, but I feel like yourself, as someone who's researched and studied, and like this is pretty much what you've been working on for the last few years, it's important that if you give it to us, that we have access to you and the wealth of knowledge. And as you said, like, you know, you want to be able to share what you have. So I think let's definitely look and do this again, and expand further. Is there anything else you want to say? Any burning points you want to make? You can compliment me on my car analogy earlier if you want.
Yeah, we could talk like about cars. No worries about
I don't want to talk about cars. Honestly, I'm so good. I have a French car, by the way. I know you don't like pronouncing French words. It's a Peugeot. Is that French? Right?
Good luck with that.
Okay. If I have any problems, I'll come to you. But yeah, anything you want to add?
I think I'm good. Yeah. There's nothing I can think about right now. No.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this as much as I thought I would. Which is a lot, by the way, just to be clear. And yeah, let's definitely have you back. I think, as I said, like the videos that we did, I love the videos, and I love your video style. Genuinely, I've told you this off air, but I might as well tell you now as well. There's like a certain realness and freshness to it. So like the AI video that we mentioned right at the beginning, and even the videos that we did for TMV, you have this ability of kind of using stock movie footage. And making points that are relevant to today. I feel bad a little bit, but I asked you to tone down the references to like contemporary Muslim individuals and figures in the series we made for TMV, but you kind of don't hold any punches in other videos that you've made.
No, I mean, you know, it's like, you know, because, you know, even, you know, structures like, let's say, you know, charities or these like prevent volas, they are colonial agents. This is what they are. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we need to understand they're victims of the system as well. This is why, you know, like as horrible as they are, I cannot hate them. It's not like, of course, we need to hold them to account.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also need to think of ways for us to improve as a community. You know, it's the whole thing of cancel culture. Fair enough, we have like organizations like making people redundant once they make sexist or racist statements. But what happens next? You know, you have the standard apology, we swear it's never gonna happen again. But it's been 10 years of happening again and again and again. Why? Because the same people, they go to some other charities, some other TV stations, they do the same mistakes with some other people. And we don't have like a community or like a system, like a safety nets for people to grow from their mistakes, understand like why what you said was harmful. What is the mindset behind this? And how should you say things, and how you should think to be like a true caliph, a khalifa for the community, a steward.
I've always said one thing, and I stand by this, especially in light of this kind of cancel culture and social media and whatever else. Whenever I've seen someone say or do something problematic that I know personally, and this I would extend this to you as well. I haven't called you out on anything, but if I saw you say something problematic, my first instinct would be to call you or to message you. Mm-hmm. And I feel like because of this guilty by association and trial by social media environment that we live in, people are scared. So like if I am seen to be like, you know, if I tweet you or whatever, or we're seen to be friends, suddenly people are like deleting their history, and there's like, you know, there was one recent incident where someone had a bit of a social media shit show surrounding them, and one of their very good friends basically posted a picture online and was like, these are my day one guys. Anybody else doesn't exist in my life. Essentially disowning this guy a little bit, right? And distancing himself. And we're so quick to do that. And I'm sure these guys had conversations behind closed doors and whatever else. But social media has become such a disease in that way. Like, I don't want to go off on a rant about this because I do want to end this. But maybe next time we can pick up on talking about social media and move on from there. But I want to thank you for coming in and doing this podcast, and for the videos that you've contributed in the past, and hopefully will continue to do going forward. And keep up the good work. I love all your work, to be honest, and your Facebook statuses. I love seeing the despair in your statuses as you describe the process of writing this book and how painful it's been. No, but I wish you all the best. Thank you very much, William.
Well, thanks to you, Salim.